great to be here this morning. It's always wonderful to have an opportunity to worship God. It's great every time we have a chance to come together and be able to study a little bit about the Bible and see some lessons from it that we can apply to our life and have some practical application. Around this time of the year, there's a lot of emotions that are going around that are different from other times of the year, and I always like to address the different emotions of the different seasons, the different times. And around this time of the year, one of the biggest proponents, whether you're watching TV, listening to the radio, or just walking around town, is fear. Specifically, the Halloween season, about hauntings, about All Hallows Eve, witchcraft, warlocks, all other beasts and other things such as that. And there are things we should fear, things we should be very afraid of. There are things that haunt us, although possibly not in the same sense of what this season might think. Things that stick with us, things that cause us problems and constantly pester us. And I want us to do a season this month looking at how we are haunted, dealing with our own brokenness, dealing with our own things about us that don't work possibly as they should, that not only cause us problems now, but will come back to haunt us in the future. This morning's lesson is going to focus around one thing that applies to each and every one of us in here. Haunted by doubt. No matter who you are, no matter where you're from, how old you are, how young you are, at one point in your life, you either have already been or will be haunted by doubt. It happens to the best of us and the worst of us. It's not something any of us can escape. If you want to let me turn over to James chapter 1 and verse 6, that's going to be the text for this morning's lesson. And while you're turning over there, I want to kind of direct our minds into exactly what I'm talking about. You see, all of the lessons, but especially this morning's, are going to have to do with fear. Because fear is a proponent of doubt. And doubt is a proponent of fear. I've mentioned before in lessons that fear itself can be the biggest root of all your problems, because many things stem out of fear. That's why it's so powerful when we read passages like perfect love casts out all fear. We can see how love can counteract all those problems. But the question I have for us this morning is, what are you afraid of? Because this fear is what will cause you to doubt, and this doubt is what will cause you to fear. What are you afraid of? I've also mentioned many times in lessons that I'm a particular fan of a particular book series, the Harry Potter series. I enjoyed reading those when I was little. And when I was looking at this lesson and trying to find the perfect illustration, this is what came to my mind. If you have read the books or have not, this can still be understood. There was a creature, and this creature was known as the boggart. And this boggart did not have any distinct shape of itself. Upon seeing an individual, it would take the shape of what they feared the most. And this particular creature exposes what's deep down and most fearful inside of people. And in particular, the particular scene that's being shown here from the movie, if you watch the movie, is when the students are each having to face this boggart and having to face their fear. Interestingly enough, what young Harry's fear was fear itself. Young Harry's fear is not what everyone else expected it to be, his great arch enemy. His fear was sadness, having his fears exposed and laid out in front of him. His fear was the unknown. His fear was smoke and shadows. Now that isn't a particular picture there of it, but his fear would cause him problems, specifically, almost even costing him his life. Well, how does this have anything to do with what we are talking about this morning? The biggest fear that most have is the unknown, what they can't see. When I was young, and in fact to a certain point still to this day, I was scared of the dark. And I did not like people telling me I was scared of the dark. I still don't like people telling me that. So if you joke with me after church, we might have words. I always would say, I'm not scared of the dark. I'm scared of what might be in the dark. I don't like not being able to see what might be there. Because there is real and present danger in the dark sometimes. It was the unknown. It was not knowing what's out there. I have a real problem with not having a firm grasp on what's right in front of me, of not knowing what's going to happen, of not being in control of my situation, which made it very difficult this past week when we had to fly across the country. I was very out of control. It was very stressful. I was very fearful because I didn't know what would happen. Being haunted by doubt is something that I want us to see is something that will apply to you. I don't want us to get the idea that I am free from doubt. There's no way this is ever going to creep into my life. In James chapter 1 and verse 6 says, "But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind." This morning I want us to first look at the disappointed doubter. I want us to look at how we ourselves can fit into that role and should not be disappointed when we find ourselves there. Second, I want us to look at the problem with doubting, And third, I want us to look at the solution to doubt. Now, it's important, it's imperative, while we're looking through this, that we make the connection to us. And that's why I made this first point so rock solid and personal. It's going to get personal. Who is the infamous doubter? If I asked you who the person in the Bible was that was the doubter, almost instantly a name pops in everybody's mind: Doubting Thomas. Doubting Thomas was the one that didn't believe that Jesus had risen from the dead. He said, I want to see the holes in his hands myself. I want to see his side where it was pierced. In John chapter 20, beginning in verse 24, we have the account of that actually taking place. But I think we'll find is that the infamous doubter that has gotten this horrible reputation, as some have put it, this horrible coined phrase, was not alone. John chapter 20, beginning in verse 24. Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. Now, this is speaking of before, when he had already appeared. So the other disciples told him, We have seen the Lord. But he said to them, Unless I see in his hands the marks of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe. 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them, and said, Peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, Put your finger here, and see my hands. Put out your hand and place it at my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. Thomas answered him, My Lord and my God. Jesus said to him, Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen, and yet have believed. Now, just from reading this one account, it would sound like that Thomas messed up. Thomas should have had faith enough to know that Jesus was risen from the dead without having to see him. But that's not the way Jesus put it, was it? Jesus said, Blessed be the one who has not seen and still believed. Was it wrong of Thomas to want some kind of evidence? Was it wrong of Thomas to have a good reason, want to have a good reason to believe in what was beyond belief, which was supernatural, which was contrary to what always happens? Now, by this time, I'll agree, he should have been able to realize that Jesus was the Son of the God, that Jesus was the Messiah, that he had the power of the dead. After all, he raised Lazarus. Couldn't he take himself up as well? By this time, he should have seen from Jesus calming the storm, From Jesus turning the water into wine, feeding the 5,000. Of all these things, he should have been able to tell Jesus was the Son of God. But he doubted. We shouldn't look down on him for doing that. Do you know that Thomas wasn't the only one that doubted that Jesus had came back from the dead? Look over in Mark chapter 16 and verse 14. Mark chapter 16 and verse 14. We have a tendency to focus in on a particular passage of Scripture and sometimes ignore the other accounts of the same thing. This was just the time when the disciples had already seen Jesus, but Thomas had not. Notice what happens here in verse 14 when he's giving them the Great Commission and what it records that Jesus did. Mark 16:14. Afterward he appeared to the 11 themselves as they were reclining at table, and he rebuked them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had risen. They had all not believed. When Mary came running from the tomb, Peter and John went to go see him. Peter didn't believe. When they were all together and Jesus appeared before them the first time, they had not believed. Doubt is a real and common problem. And it's not something that God expects us to live with. After all, in our text this morning, what did it say about the person who doubts? It describes him as being tossed around in a stormy sea. Being tossed to and fro, and to and fro, and to and fro. But what about this infamous doubter? He was just like everyone else. That doesn't mean that it's impossible to believe without seeing. Because the good definition of faith itself, of having knowledge, a knowledgeable faith, is having justified true belief. There's a justification involved in it. To have knowledge and have faith that's based on knowledge is to have a justified true belief. It's not just some leap in the dark that you have no reason for going. As we said before, Thomas wasn't going to have to make a leap in the dark to believe that when Jesus said, "I'm coming back from the dead," that he would do it. He had so many miracles already in place. I don't want to get too far ahead of us. What's the problem with doubt? Why is it a problem to doubt? Isn't that's such a normal part of humans? If that's a normal part of humanity, then why is it an issue if I doubt at all? Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1 gives us the definition of faith. I could spend all day trying to define faith, but it'd be better just to let God do it. And Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1 gives an excellent definition. Describes faith as assurance. Describes faith as conviction. It says faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. It's not a leap in the dark. It's assurance. It's firm conviction. Well, how can I be so sure? How can I be so convicted of something that I can't see? How can I be so sure of something that I have no reason to believe in? That is the question, isn't it? And the question is answered itself in the question. How can I be so sure of something that I have no reason to believe in? Well, there's the root of the problem. It's assuming too much. I believe that George Washington lived. I believe George Washington was instrumental in our revolution. I believe he led some boats across the Delaware. I believe that Abraham Lincoln lived. I believe he was instrumental in getting the Emancipation Proclamation put through legislation and freeing the slaves. I believe that. I believe many of the accounts in history. Why would I have so much faith on something I've never seen? Something I've never experienced. I've never been to India. If we were to ask Terry about India, I'm sure he could tell us many things about it, but I've never seen it. I've seen some pictures in the slideshow. But for all I know, that was taken in some shacks down in Mexico. I don't have any real reason for knowing or believe unless there's something more involved. In Psalm chapter 73, the first 10 verses, we see an individual who doubted. Doubting's a problem because it negates faith, since faith is assurance, since faith is conviction. Doubting doesn't really go with assurance and conviction. Doubting's a problem because it can cause us to lose faith and to lose our faith entirely. In Psalm 73, we have someone named Asaph writing, and he's writing about a problem he had. He's writing about the problem of the wicked prospering and the righteous suffering. He doesn't understand. He can't figure out why this would happen. Notice how he describes it here. Psalm 73, verse 1. The Psalm of Asaph. Truly God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled. My steps had nearly slipped. For I was envious of the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. For they have no pain until death. Their bodies are fat and sleek. They are not in trouble as others are. They are not stricken like the rest of mankind. Therefore pride is their necklace. Violence covers them as a garment. Their eyes swell out through fatness. Their hearts overflow with follies. They scoff and speak with malice. Loftily they threaten oppression. They set their mouths against the heavens, and their tongue struts through the earth. Therefore his people turn back to them and find no fault in them. How is that a problem? Doubting, not understanding. Did you notice he said that his feet had almost stumbled? That his steps had nearly slipped? Look at the question that led the people of Israel, specifically Asaph, to ask in verse 11. And they say, how can God know? Is there really knowledge in the Most High? How could God know if the suffering ones are the righteous ones? How can He really have all knowledge if the unrighteous, the evil, are the ones that's prospering? He had a problem. He doubted. He doubted if there was even a God, if there was justice in God. What's interesting is if you continue reading, you can find how he comes to his conclusion. He goes into the house of the Lord, and he realizes that all the wealth and prosperity here on earth is not worth eternal damnation and punishment. That the little bit of happiness and health and prosperity here is not them winning anything when they spend eternity in torment. He realized that when the righteous suffer here on earth, that's nothing in comparison to eternal life with God in heaven, to eternal happiness. But he had a problem. And his doubt almost caused him to fall. He goes on to say that if he would have spoken of his doubt to someone else, led someone else astray by his own problems, his own doubts, that he would have been responsible for others. And he was happy he didn't. Doubt can cause serious problems. Well, Jacob, how do you balance these two? Everyone has doubt. It's going to happen to everyone. And doubts can cause you to lose your faith. That sounds like it just spells trouble. What's the solution? What's our answer? The solution to doubt is to examine the evidence. God never asked us to take a blind leap in the dark. He doesn't today. He doesn't ask for a leap of faith out into nothing. If He did, we wouldn't have any reason to have a Bible. All we would need is a list of things we need to do. And that would be the end of it. We wouldn't need records of all of these miracles that He had done. We wouldn't need all of these wonderful stories of God's provision. In Luke chapter 1, verse 1, gives the reason for why he's writing. Luke was not there personally when a lot of things in the gospel took place. He spent a lot of time traveling around with Paul, who was present for many of these things. He spent a lot of time gathering up information. Luke chapter 1 and verse 1 says, "Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us. It seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things you've been taught." This man, Theophilus, more of a title than a name, was a prominent individual who seemed to be doubting, wasn't really certain. So Luke, who had been following these things, Luke the historian, he decided to compile a narrative of all of these records and provide them to Theophilus. Interestingly enough, when he writes the book of Acts, he does the same thing. He lists that he was compiling a narrative. Now, the difference is in Acts, he was an eyewitness of any of these things with his travelings with Paul. You'll find many times that Luke, the physician, was with him. It was with Paul as he was traveling. The solution now, examine the evidence. Look at the recorded Bible that's sitting in front of you. An interesting study for another time would be just how reliable this thing is. And suffice it now to say, I challenge each and every one of you. I challenge you all to find something in here that's incorrect, that contradicts itself. Any problem that would give you any reason to think it's uninspired. I challenge you to do that. I would encourage you, if you have something like that, come and we'll find out the answer together. But you'll find there's always an answer. That it always proves true and reliable. That its survival for thousands of years has not been by chance. That even though there were so many different writers over thousands of years compiling this book together, they all agree. They all have the same unified purpose because they have the same inspiring spirit. The solution to doubt. Examine the evidence that's been laid out right in front of you. In John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31, John does something similar to what Luke did. John says the purpose for writing the book, but more so than that, he gives the purpose for the miracles that Jesus provided. Now, he mentions that he recorded these ones particularly for a reason. Verse 30 says, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and by believing you may have life in His name." If you were to try to record all the things that Jesus did, in John 21 and 25, he says that if every one of them were written, it's supposed that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. But these things were written for a purpose. Why? So that you can know that Jesus is the Son of God. So that you don't have to have a faith that is blinded in the dark, but one that's based on truth. That's been proven by the miracles that Jesus did. By the eyewitnesses that saw it take place. What's the solution to doubt? Building your house on a rock instead of in sand. Building your house on a firm foundation. Not just the faith of your parents and your grandparents. Not the faith of your friends. Not the faith of your church. The faith based on the evidence. The faith based on the truth. What's right in front of us. The way God intended it. Doubt will come. Please, don't let the storms of doubt wreck your faith. Don't let it batter it back and forth until you fall, as Asaph almost did. Anchor your faith. Withstand the storms, basing it on the truth, basing it on the evidence, basing it on Jesus Himself. This evening, we're going to continue our study of 2 Timothy. And as we're continuing our study of 2 Timothy, we're going to look at how to be a good soldier in his army. But perhaps you're not a soldier in God's army. Maybe you have not committed to anything. Maybe you just don't believe. That's something that could very well be the case this morning. I would encourage you, if that is the case, give us a chance. Give us a chance to show you why you should believe. There's no more important topic to discuss. There's no more important conversation you could ever have than about whether or not Jesus Christ is the Son of God. About whether or not the things in this Bible are true. Whether or not He rose from the dead. And whether or not He's coming again to judge the world. If you're not covered by His grace, if you're not believing in His faith, won't you do that this morning? All together, we stand and sing.